Don't let the bad neighbor vulnerability crash your IT party.
Hey, Mike, I heard you have a story about a bad neighbor.
Yeah, and this one's posed to potentially cause some problems. So Microsoft, as they do every month, issued their patches here this past Tuesday, and among them was a critical vulnerability that's being dubbed a bad neighbor. This is CVE 2020-16898, and this is a remote code execution bug inside the Windows TCP/IP stack. Now, upon exploitation, what this is going to initially do is cause a denial of service attack, resulting in a blue screen of death on Windows machines. And while this in and of itself is bad, this does suggest the possibility that it could be leveraged in a more robust capacity for remote code execution, though that likelihood does seem to be diminished because an attacker would need to overcome other protections in the system, such as ASLR, in order to get their code to actually execute. This one was fairly interesting, though. Microsoft released proof of concept code to partners, which was found to be both very, very reliable and fairly trivial. Ultimately, what we're talking about here is a vulnerability inside of an ICMP version 6 router advertisement packet that allows you to sneak in an extra header. And because the link field isn't adequately validated, can result in a critical error resulting in a blue screen of death. Now, this is going to impact both client and server versions of Windows, Windows version 10, 1709 up to 2004, as well as Windows servers version 1903 up to 2004, as well as the Windows Server 2019 platforms. So this is going to be a very important vulnerability for a lot of environments. Pretty much everybody's out there running Windows in some area of their environment. And what's interesting is that many or Windows systems in general come with dual stack enabled by default. So they're running IPv6 or running IPv4, and Microsoft really does not recommend that you disable IPv6. That they really you set a policy to prefer IP version 4. So you've got this IP version 6 stack out there that is ready to accept IP version 6 packets, which does make this somewhat of a problem kind of by default. Now, originally when this was released here a couple of days ago, this was given a 9.8 from a CVE rating. Or CVSS rating, rather. This has been downgraded a little bit to an 8.8 because it's subsequently been discovered that the vulnerability does not appear to be routable over the internet. It is going to look for a link local address in that ICMP version 6 packet. So this isn't necessarily going to be a denial of service attack that's going to be able to route remotely and impact internal systems, although certainly Windows systems that are internet exposed might be able to be impacted by this. But from a initial infection vector or an initial compromise vector, this is really going to be more of a denial of service risk, often probably used as a secondary mechanism after an initial foothold is gotten on the victim's network, I would think, and used by attackers in that manner. Now, there is active proof of concept code that has been released in the wild as of a couple of days ago, and this proof of concept code is able to basically result in that blue screen of death, denial of service condition on affected machines. From a workaround perspective, there are some recommendations that Microsoft has made to disable ICMP version 6 recursive DNS options. You can do that via PowerShell, and that's really the only mitigating mechanism for addressing this issue. Really, the only way to solve for it is to get those patches deployed inside of the environment and make sure that the bug has been fully remediated.
The only thing that's good about this vulnerability is that it's a blue screen of death and not an RCE, I would say, Mike. But I was curious, do you need to be exposed, expose any particular service, or you just have like a listening IP address on the internet, and then you could become a victim of this?
From the information that I've seen so far, there's no particular port required to be or service to be published, and it's really just if you've got IPv6 on the machine, which they're dual stack by default, and they can get this IP version 6 router update, neighbor packet update over to that machine, then you are potentially in for some challenges.
Yeah, it's a very serious threat. So the patch is already available. So I think the best thing to do is patch as soon as possible, or implement some firewall technologies there to make sure you're not getting those version 6 ICMP packets.
Do you know if this is targeting mostly like enterprise users, or for IPv6? I guess if Windows comes with both IPv6 and IPv4 turned on, I guess everyone that's running a later version of Windows is vulnerable to this, unless patched. Is that correct?
Yeah, pretty much. It was actually probably going to be more impactful for enterprises, so much so that the U.S. Cyber Command actually issued a warning for organizations to patch this immediately here this past week. So certainly there's a lot of focus on this. Like I said, it has been downgraded a little bit given the kind of localized nature of the exploit chain and some of the other controls inherent in the ecosystem, such as ASLR, to help mitigate the risk of remote code execution. That seems to be a possibility, but a very remote one at this point. But still, looking back at other vulnerabilities we've seen, certainly there have been other flaws that have allowed for bypassing of ASLR and other memory management technologies that we've seen come up in the Microsoft stack over the past few years. So, certainly this might be able to be chained together with other issues for greater effect. That's always a possibility.
Yeah, really interesting story. I think the patch now is really the best strategy here, and if you can't, follow some of the mitigation steps, like make sure you have the firewall in place to prevent these kinds of packets to get into your machine.